got some super middleweight fights coming up, okay, that I want to speak on. I'm going to run through real quick in one video. Let's start off with Marco Antonio Rubio against Anthony Durrell, okay? Rubio, I believe, hasn't fought all year. He hasn't fought since he lost to Gennady Golovkin, okay, which was a disappointing loss because we all thought that was going to be a pretty action-packed fight, with the whole Mexican style thing. And Golovkin easily beat him and stopped him in the second round, okay? Rubio got knocked down and didn't get up in enough time, okay? And we haven't seen him fight since then, okay? And he's fighting Anthony Durrell, a guy that's coming off of a loss. His first title defense was against Badou Jack, and he lost that fight, okay? He had two tough fights with Sakio Bika. He had two tough fights against Sakio Bika. The first fight was a draw. First fight is a fight that he was actually winning, but seemed to get outworked in the second half of that fight. Actually went to that fight live. And then the second fight, he did a much better job keeping the fight in the center of the ring. And he won the WBC title at 168. And then he went on to fight Badou Jack in PBC, a fight that I thought he would win. Badou Jack got knocked out in a couple fights prior to that to Derek Edwards. And I thought Anthony Durrell was going to be able to win the fight, but Badou Jack looked very, very impressive in that fight and won that fight. And now Durrell is back fighting Marco Antonio Rubio. Now, this is a fight that I feel Durrell should be able to win. Okay, the fight is at 168. I believe Rubio has fought at 168 before, but the majority of his fights, his bigger fights, were at 160. Okay, so Marco Antonio Rubio, a guy that is a solid boxer, got good punching power, good technique, good legs, has a good jab, and he works behind it very, very, very well. And pretty solid defensively. But he lost most of his bigger fights, by fighters that kept the pressure on him throughout the whole fight. Julio Cesar Chavez, you had Kelly Pavlik, that fight from years ago. And recently he lost to Golovkin, okay? Guys that were able to get him against the ropes and just pound away at him, he's a solid guy at middleweight, even solid size at middleweight, but he's going to be fighting a guy, Anthony Durrell. You're going to notice the size difference immediately. Durrell's a few inches taller, longer reach, okay? And, even though Durrell is not a crazy, huge volume puncher like some of the other fighters that Rubio has lost to, he's bigger, he's a hard puncher himself, and has good technique himself, okay? Defensively, not great, but he seems to come off to have a tough chin. I expect Durrell to win this fight. I'm not sure if it's going to be by stoppage, but I expect Durrell to try to come out early and try to get a knockout early. If he's not successful, he's usually gassed out early because his conditioning is pretty bad. But Rubio is not a pressure fighter, in my opinion, and I think Durrell should be comfortable throughout this fight, okay? Even if he is tired at some point, I think Rubio is not going to bring the action and try to outwork him like a Badou Jack did, okay, in that fight, or Sakio Bika did in the first fight. I just don't see Rubio having that kind of skill to sustain, like, just keep working and keep working. I just don't think he has it in him, all right? And, Durrell is a bigger guy, and he's fighting at a weight that he's been fighting at, he's been champion at. I just think Durrell should be able to win that fight, honestly. By knockout, it could be by knockout, could be a stoppage in there, but, I wouldn't be surprised if it went to the decision either, right? So let's move on. You got George Groves fighting Badou Jack. Now, this is a good fight here. This is going to be on the undercard of the Mayweather-Berto. This is actually a pretty good fight because it's really hard to call who's going to win this fight. All right? Badou Jack was a guy that I never was really impressed with. Okay, I thought he was solid at the most. Just never thought he was really that good. I was very impressed with him in his last fight against Anthony Durrell. A fight that he outworked him, had very good defense, had a very tight defense, and he outworked Durrell. And he beat him clearly to me. I thought he won the fight. He looked impressive doing it. But before that, if this fight would have ever happened before Badou Jack's last fight, I would probably tell you that George Groves would win this fight, even possibly by KO, okay? Now, I know George Groves lost 2 fights to Carl Froch. He got stopped in the first, very controversial. They had a rematch, and Carl Froch knocked him out. Even with those knockouts, you got to understand, he got knocked out by Carl Froch, okay? One of the best in the division. Knocked out plenty of good fighters in his day. So even though I thought George Groves had a chance of winning those fights, I'm not really surprised that he got knocked out by Carl Froch. Okay, remember George Groves did beat James DeGale before. He did beat him before early in his career, and he has some solid wins under his belt, and he's a pretty good fighter. He has good reflexes, quick hands, good on his legs. Pretty slick fighter if you really think about it. Badou Jack is a guy that has good technique, has good defense, and he definitely is a pretty front foot heavy type of fighter. I don't know where to go with it because even though Badou Jack looked impressive in his last fight, he did get knocked out a few fights ago, okay? And George Groves got knocked out recently as well. This fight here, it's a good fight, but this fight will kind of gauge how good both of these fighters are at this point, okay? They both had their big fights. This is going to be George Groves' big opportunity again to win the title since his loss. I've seen one of his fights in between the fights he had between this one and Carl Froch. It was a guy that he fought that he ended up stopping, but I haven't seen it recently. But, a lot of people said George Groves has fell off. He hasn't looked that impressive. But even so, if we see George Groves at his best, I think George Groves at his best day is probably still better than Badou Jack. I think George Groves on his best day is probably better than Anthony Durrell as well, all right? I don't know which George Groves we're getting, and you know what? I don't know how durable or either one of these fighters are, because even though they had wins, they both got knocked out recently, George Groves have good punching power. He does have a decent KO ratio. He's knocked a lot of guys out. He even dropped Carl Froch early in that first fight. Plus, he has the hand speed advantage, So it's hard to call it. I think early on, if this is a fight, I really don't know where to call it. I think if George Groves obviously is able to hurt Badou Jack early in the fight, I think there's a good chance he'll win the fight if he's able to stop him early. Badou Jack on the other half, I think if the longer the fight goes, the better chances of Badou Jack winning this fight. I think he can outwork Groves in the later rounds of this fight, okay? I think eventually George Groves will slow down because he slowed down in the fights against Carl Froch, okay? I don't know where to go with this one, okay? I really don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards Badou Jack because he looked the most impressive in a recent fight. But any other time, I probably would have told you George Groves got this one in the bag easy, all right? Now, before I keep moving, we got the last thing I want to speak on was Andre Ward. He could possibly be fighting on the undercard of Cotto and Canelo. Okay, I read an article on that I think a couple weeks ago. I think it's a good look. I mean, who wouldn't want to be on the undercard of that pay-per-view? It's going to be a big pay-per-view, and since both of them, him and Miguel Cotto, are both Rock Nation, it makes sense. Who is he going to fight? I don't know. It really depends. Is he going to fight at 168 or is he going to fight at 175? We all know his return match was at 172 against Paul Smith, okay? So I don't know what Ward is going to try to do. Is he going to try to stick around at 168? I know people have been talking about him fighting Golovkin and possibly fighting Sergey Kovalev at 175. So it really depends. I really don't know what weight he's gonna fight at, but I'm hoping that whoever he fights is a better fight than Paul Smith. I believe that it's gonna be a better opponent than Paul Smith, but not the guy that people want to see him fight. I actually want him, if he's gonna fight at 168, I would love for him to fight a James DeGale. Okay, I think that is the best fight that could be made at 168. Plus, is a busy. As you can see with the previous fights I just spoke on, everybody is pretty much scheduled at 168. You know, you got Arthur Abraham. He holds a title at 168, but I don't know if he's trying to get the fight with Bernard Hopkins. We know that Bernard Hopkins may be trying to fight him on his last fight. Um, and, you know, Ward already beat him before, okay? So who knows if that fight could be made. Also at 168, it's really not anyone else available. Um, you know, I don't think he would fight Andre Dirrell right now, especially because Dirrell is an Al Heyman fighter. I don't know how that would work, especially with Rock Nation. Um, you have a couple young guys coming up. You got Fedor Shuvanev from, I believe he's from the Ukraine. You got the UK fighter Callum Smith. Both of those guys are undefeated. You know, I think those are pretty solid fights. All right, not the best fight, but they're solid fights. Both of those guys are undefeated and they're young fighters. So maybe Andre Ward want to take one of them. Is he going to fight somebody at 175? If it is, it's not going to be a Stevenson or a Kovalev or anything like that. But could it be from forward? Could it be John Pascal? You know, who would Andre Ward fight at 175? Could it be Chavez Jr.? You know, I mean, this is a big pay-per-view, so maybe Chavez Jr., you know, maybe get the fight with that. But he's also Al Heyman. So I don't know how possible it is for him to get a fight with an Al Heyman fighter. But there's options out there. I mean, I would love to see him on the card, but I would like him to step up from Paul Smith, okay? Because the Paul Smith fight was an easy fight for him. All right, so let me know what you guys think. Throw some names out there as far as Andre Ward. Who do you think is going to win between Groves and Badou Jack? Because I think that's a tough one to call. I think that's a 50-50 fight. And who do you think between Rubio and Dirrell? I think Dirrell is definitely should win that fight. It's a problem. If he can't beat Rubio, then he has a serious problem. He should be able to beat Rubio. You know, I think that's like a 70-30 type of fight, you know, 75% chance of Dirrell winning to 25%. You know, but the other fight I think is a 50-50 fight. All right, so let me know what you guys think and make sure you guys hit subscribe.